Old business.
The first item under old business, or the only item under old business, is the Nashville General Hospital investigation. We presented this at the last meeting, and through discussion kind of determined that this would be an ongoing item that we would follow up with at each meeting until all of the recommendations and issues that were identified in that report were addressed. So this is kind of just a check-in on where we are. Monthly, our lead investigator, Paul, has been going out there and meeting with the interim CEO and her staff to find out what they're doing, and then also taking it a step further of, like normally with an audit, when recommendations are implemented, we wait until they're all implemented to verify. Paul is verifying as things are being reported that they're being done. So he's been going out there, and so far about 5 of the 12 recommendations have been implemented. 2 of them were implemented when they canceled the valet contract. And then with recouping the money, they're still in the process of doing that, working through the legal process with that. With the contracts that did not go to the board, they canceled many of those, most of those. They had some that had already expired, as well as there were a few that they decided to determine if they wanted to continue on. And they have since the one, I think it was 1, maybe 2, that they wanted to possibly evaluate to continue using. They went back to the board with those to make sure that they were properly approved. So the contracts have been reviewed, but the process itself, they've implemented a contract management system that's better than they had. They've implemented DocuSign so that you don't have to worry about the contracts not being executed properly or the signatures not being put on there correctly. All that's now recorded with DocuSign, which was just implemented, and Paul actually still has to verify that part. As well as made some other changes in their processes and their policies to make sure the contracts going forward follow a standard process. With the doctor that was operating out of their facility without an agreement, all of the scheduling for that was canceled. They're looking into quantifying, if they can, how much money was spent on that. There's not necessarily a clear plan on that, but they are trying to look into that. They self-reported a violation, and then as well as, I believe Meharry also self-reported a violation in response to that. So that's all still in process. And the last one was related to public records requests and not sending out sufficient documents or just kind of altered documents. They now have a public records policy that they've put in place. It's still being verified whether or not that process is actually operating, but they have at least come up with a policy and a good policy in place to do that. And that's from within our investigation. I believe for the finance piece of it, they're working with a financial consultant that is working with them to get financial processes in place for the close process and other financial processes so that, especially when the act for time comes, they are ready and they are actually operating correctly.
Could you, since this is going to be an ongoing item for a while, could you put together just a matrix of the findings and the resolutions, like, yes, on the end of this? Because this like what we have in our packet, yes, is just like the actual audit, but it would be handy to have a little checklist there. Thank you.
Any other questions on where we are in that process?
Chair, may I ask a related question?
Certainly.
Regarding DocuSign, my question there would be, why does not every Metro or Metro-associated department within our government use DocuSign, right? Like if we sort of level set that standard for any department that's contracting, and I know that obviously there's the hospital authority and that's a little bit adjacent or situated. Is there an opportunity there just as a check to make sure, I mean, this was a particular issue on contract signing that was elevated through this audit, but I would say just from a best practices perspective, and I think this is going to come up later with arts, like the time tracking, right, of people tracking their time, and they were using a different platform that Metro doesn't use. So is, from an audit perspective, if Metro uses DocuSign elsewhere, is there a way that we can sort of approach from a policy perspective for purposes of good audit or, practice to have something like DocuSign, if that's Metro's preferred, that we require that it be used? Or can you just sort of speak to that? I mean, if you went to any department today, I just feel like everything that comes through our office, it has to be DocuSign because it came that way to start, right? Like that's how it's going through the process of all the sign-offs.
To say for contracts, and you may be able to correct me if I'm wrong with procurement. I mean, everything that I've gotten as far as for even executing contracts within our office, they are going through DocuSign. Where it wouldn't necessarily be applicable would be those lower dollar value below the $25,000 threshold, where maybe we're signing not necessarily a contract.
It's now 50.
50,000 threshold, where it may be that things are executed without DocuSign. But that would be, I mean, yes, that would be a best practice and is something that we can keep in mind, especially as we do audits of other departments and look for those things.
Okay. And then, Chair, my other thing, just in a best practice space of trying to make sure everybody in Metro kind of does things in a similar fashion. I know we've talked about kind of the disparity among departments on how they respond to public records requests and kind of how they set the cost and the time and the thresholds there. So I would just kind of elevate that again here. I mean, these seem to be two potentially recurring things that could be best or addressed through sort of best practice approaches. So, okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's everything on old business?
Yes.
Okay. New business, we have a discussion of a request for an audit of the property assessor's office.
Yes, so our office, whenever we receive an audit request, assuming it is not something pressing or pertinent to that we need to go on and pick up, we're going to bring it to you all to evaluate if you would like to amend the audit plan, because we cannot start or do audits without your prior approval. So we received a request to audit the property assessor's office, specifically the reappraisal process. There were concerns around the effectiveness of it or the efficiency of it that were raised with this concern that we received. It was received, but the person would prefer to remain anonymous. And so we're bringing it to you. What we did was we went and looked back at the old audits that we have done. Our most recent audit of the assessor's office was in 2017. During that, we looked at the administrative functions of the office, as well as did a follow-up of an IT audit that was done in 2014. So those were the objectives of that audit. We also looked at some other municipalities to see what kind of audits they've done at the assessor's office, to see if there was anything that we could learn from that or objectives that we could apply to this. There weren't a whole lot out there, in all honesty. Most of them were geared more towards the administrative functions and not the reappraisal processes. If we did do this one, we would have to have a consultant do it, not one of ours that's on contract right now. We would probably have to find a specialist in the reappraisal process in order to fairly evaluate that process, since that's not our expertise. And if this one is decided to be added to the audit plan, I would recommend just adding it, because we're not sure of the scope right now. And so I don't know what we would remove.
That's what I was just
or move around. Usually I can kind of, especially during the end of the year, I can project out which auditors are going to do what audits, but we're still pretty early into this audit plan year, so I can't project out who's doing what yet, so I'm not really sure.
Can you share a little bit more about what the request to audit was for? I mean, what specifically?
It was a very generic request as far as just concerns around the reappraisal process and whether or not they were appropriately performed.
And I understand there may be some other comments that you would like to make.
Sure, absolutely. Good evening, Board. I am the Assessor of Property of Nashville, Davidson County. Excuse my shoes. I use these around the office. I normally come in a little bit more professional shoes. Thank you for this opportunity, Auditor Riley, to be here today. I have here with me my Chief Deputy of Information Technology, Mr. Brad Pigg. I have my Chief Deputy of Administration, Ms. Christy Scott, who's also an attorney. I want to first say that I was notified of this audit at 10 o'clock at night, out with some friends, and an attorney friend of mine contacted me to say, tell me you know about this. I said, no, I do not know about this. I've gone through all of my hundreds and thousands of email, which are already open and been open, and none has come from the audit committee to inform me of this. So I think this is kind of not appropriate in the sense of us being blindsided. So I have a question in reference to what is the process of notifying offices. I don't know if you notify departments, but notifying offices of any time, whether it's anonymous or it is not anonymous, of a concern regarding a department. I think it's only fair that the office be notified. The 2017 audit that you mentioned, let me go further. So when I saw this, it says a discussion on the request for an audit of the property assessor's office assessment processes and administrative processes. Well, we have someone that does that. It's called the Comptroller of the Treasury, and it's the Division of Property Assessment. We continue to reply to routine reports quarterly that audit the works that we do in our office. We recently passed our audit with flying colors. If we are running after sales, we can be taken over by the Comptroller of the Treasury, just like Metro government can be taken over by the Comptroller of the Treasury when there is not a balanced budget provided by a certain time of the year. So that's where our audits come from. Not only do we do one audit, we do quarterly audits. We have routine review of samplings of our values and our approach. As a matter of fact, before I even was blessed with the opportunity to represent you as your assessor of property, this office has always been the framework for all offices to work from. We have the capacity to be able to do things such as do research, and also working with the mayor's office, not just this mayor's office, but prior mayor's offices, to bring about the information that they're looking for and the procedure that they're working for that could better serve the people of Davidson County, such as more frequent reappraisals, which is about to happen as a result of a support from the mayor, this mayor and prior mayor. We wouldn't be doing that if we were doing something wrong. And I spoke with my governing body today, the Department of Property Assessment. They are not aware of any complaint. They said, we never receive a complaint on your office because you guys are not only transparent, but you do a lot of outreach in reference to when you say, in reference to our procedures. We have done already, I had estimated more than 300 outreach presentations in all council districts. And when we look at the numbers again, it was really 426 outreach presentations since 2016 to ensure that people are aware of the procedure and the process of valuing in the reappraisal year. We've made it clear about what part and role that we play, and we are very perplexed by this request. Anytime a council member, which I understand that is the person that wants to be anonymous, I think that's not fair to me as an elected official in reference to the procedures that we follow, that the state requires of us, that not the mayor can tell us how to do a reappraisal, nor the Metro Council members, but only it is Comptroller of the Treasury, Jason Mumpower, the Division of Property Assessment, the General Assembly, who makes laws every session that they're in that we're studying by all of the 95 assessors across the state, looking at every rule, every law, and to ensure that it is in the best interest of the property owner. So we would appreciate the openness in reference to anything that is being filed against our office to give us the opportunity to address it. And as I stated again, the Department of Property Assessment, the Comptroller of the Treasury, and the Executive Secretary of the Independent State Board of Equalization, Robin Pope, who I spoke with today, he's very perplexed by this and have stated, we have received nothing. We are not aware of anything. But if there was anything that needed to be audited, we would know it because we're the one that not only established the process in reference to how you do the reappraisal and valuing property. We're also the organization and entity that ensures that you're doing properly. I do have a colleague down the road who is under investigation by the State Board of Equalization, and it is clear what he has done, and it's unfortunate, but we never not report any improvements that is on your property because that affects the county's bottom line, and that is stealing from the county when you don't do that. So I say all this to conclude, we still would appreciate knowing more in-depth information regarding the audit. And not that, Metro government is not, allowed to audit us. We welcome it because we feel very, very, very confident that we would pass any audit that you have in flying colors. I have an amazing 92 people staff who have more than enough experience in this area of reappraisal that we are the leader of all other 94 counties in Tennessee. And you mentioned about the audit in 2017. I was elected in 2016. And because I wanted to know what is it that I was blessed with, I requested that audit. And my chief deputy of information technology just mentioned about the one in 2014. So we're not aware of any other audits after that, other than the one that was requested in 2017. And I hope to not only in the future, whenever there's a concern in regards to how we approach valuation, whether it be the cost approach, the income approach, or the sales approach, that you will give us the first opportunity to respond to the concern and also do it in advance. Thank you for this opportunity today.
Thank you for your comments.
You mentioned you're audited quarterly, I guess by the comptroller. Are those publicly available
Sure.
there? But if they're
Any information, the data and the summaries and the various things that they request, we have to provide to them in reference to samplings and what have you. Yes, that's public information.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what I would say is like, if we could review those audits to see if they kind of meet any requests that's been made to audit committee, that might be the most efficient way to dispose of this.
Commissioner, may I speak?
Yeah, please.
Commissioner, that's one of the reasons why we're asking for more in-depth question in reference to what they believe. I mean, they may believe that their value or one of their constituents' value is high, but there's a reason for that. To just subjectively say why that is high and not understand about comps, not understand about improvements, not understand about the year that property was purchased versus when this property was built. Lots of people in Davidson County believe that their value goes up when a new house is built next door to them, which is the reason why, even in this year alone, we began doing education, re-educating property owners, starting in February, and we've done 45 to more to date. So it would be important that we know the details of their question, because the sampling that the state is looking for, it may not address their question.
Well, it doesn't sound like we're going to get any more details about exactly what they requested. I guess the way I was thinking about it is, if you all already have completed audits that we can look at and determine that we're going to meet the expectations of whoever has requested this audit, that might be a good way to kind of go about evaluating that. But we have to respond, I think, to requests that are made to the audit committee and are kind of bound to fairly evaluate those. So, I mean, I do feel like we need to think about how we're going to respond to this particular request.
Lauren, can you just describe generally your process when you receive a complaint?
So when we receive it,
A request for an audit is not necessarily a complaint, so I just want to put that out there. We've got a lot of defensiveness coming. I don't know, so I just wanted to say that. The defensiveness is actually a little alarming because it's not necessarily a complaint. A request for audit is just not that. So that's, go ahead, but what's our process of when someone requests an audit?
So when someone requests an audit, there's various ways, one, that we can receive them. We have a way to anonymously report them online. You can call us, you can email us. And then we also have, I'm trying to think, some people have sent letters before. So there's various ways to contact us. And what we do is we get the request and we evaluate it as far as, like I said, we're going to look at the last time we did an audit, but it's still a request. And since this one stated specifically it was from a council member that was not named, we take that to present to you. And so there's not much to it. The part that we did fail in this is we did not properly notice the assessor's office to let them know that this was on the agenda. Unfortunately, we couldn't have reached out beforehand to discuss it necessarily because, as Mr. Scanlon pointed out, it's their decision to discuss. But we should have notified you, and I do apologize for that. That was a failure on our part. But once we get it, and so we try to evaluate it to at least kind of look at it. We're going to look at it from the process standpoint, more so the efficiency and the effectiveness of it, or the performance of the process, not just the compliance with certain laws and regulations, or we would try to. And that's why I was saying that we would have to have somebody else do this, is because we don't know the intricacies of the very complex process that goes into a reappraisal.
Thanks. So, I don't know who I asked you and you wouldn't tell me, so good for you for keeping your secret. But, so I don't know the motivation behind it. I know that as a council member, I've received a lot of questions and a lot of complaints, obviously, about, this. So, I guess my first question would be, so the last audit was 2017?
Yes.
What was it before that?
2014.
So, and what was it before that?
That I'm not sure about. I didn't go back that far.
Okay, so 2014, 2017, at your request, 2017, correct? Okay. So it's been 8 years. It's probably time, in my opinion. I just think everybody should be regularly audited, not based off of a complaint, but just because I think that's best practices. When we've had a reappraisal with such a large jump in valuation where people are being impacted in a significant way, I think just for transparency purposes, I have no problem with an audit. Again, not necessarily a complaint. I think it's just to have on record somebody doing a deep dive versus a presentation of, hey, this is how we do this, having a third-party auditor saying, this is the process, these are the legal requirements, this is whatever, so that people have a better sense of trust that the process is working the way that it's supposed to and no one's being gouged and all that. Again, you're very defensive, and I, to a certain extent, understand that. I don't know that this was a complaint. I don't know how it came in.
It was not a complaint.
It was not a complaint. And so it's just a request. And so for that reason, I'm going to be supportive of the audit itself. I don't expect any wrongdoing to be, and so I think it actually would help you, because I don't think you're the most popular person right now. Maybe
no fault of your own.
Yeah, through no fault, but just this has been some sticker shock across the county with everyone. So I'm supportive of it.
Councilmember Addie.
Thank you. I agree with what you said. And we sit in here and hear about audits and investigations all the time. So if you could just kind of give a real big picture of the difference between an investigation and an audit, because there's a big difference between those two, and just sort of what the general process is and how often we usually circle back around to departments. Because I think it's important just to understand in the big context, this can be very routinely done without casting blame anywhere. Just it's important for transparency and trust for us to show that the process that was followed is best practices. And if anybody had a question, now it's all laid out there.
Sure.
And I think that's a way this can proceed. So.
Okay, so our office does both audits and investigations. Investigations are their allegations of fraud, waste, or abuse. We have the authority to go on and jump into those and launch investigations on our own, where we start to dig into those, specifically those allegations. They're very specific, with specific times, people. When we do those, they're very confidential. We don't discuss those in the audit committee until there's a report, as well as our investigator. Sometimes he may not even notify the department head until we've gone a little further. We may start talking to people depending on who the allegation is against. With an audit, it's very different. So audits, every year we put together an audit plan that we work off of, in fact, starting in February. And that we evaluate the risks across Metro. Metro's huge, our scope is huge. And we also have a staff of about to be 12 people. So we evaluate where the risks are, we look at how long it's been since we've audited a department, and we come up with an audit plan that the audit committee then can choose to change around and edit a little bit, and then that's what we work off for the year. We are not allowed to start audits without their approval. So if we get a request during the year, usually it comes in the form of this process. I have concerns about this process, or I have questions about this process. And those are ones that we have to bring back to the audit committee. And when we say the process, what we're doing is we're going out and we're information gathering, and it's hard to put a scope around most of our audits because we don't even know the start of the process when we put it on the audit plan. We go out, we do interviews, we talk to people, we find out what you all do, and then we put together an audit plan and objectives around that. And the auditee, the department that we're auditing or the official that we're auditing, y'all are involved throughout the entire process. So it's an open process. If we're asking questions, if we're looking at information, if we're finding anything, then we're letting you know as we go along. And so that is what the audit committee sets for us each year, is those audits. And those reports are the only part of that's actually public. So we do get requests. We actually don't get as many as we know. Usually they come towards the end of our audit plan year when we start to do them. Sometimes they're from department heads themselves because, like you requested one from our office to actually look at your office. And so those what we work through. And I can't remember the second part of your question.
So I just wanted to create some context because I think that's really important to know that it is important for our government to be transparent, and I think the very methodical way that we do this is an important part of that. So I think that regardless of the motivation behind the request, this is not an investigation. It is not an assumption of anything wrong. It's just the public, as has been said, I think had just some sticker shock at how much Nashville has grown in value, and that's just the math. None of us can do anything about the math, but we can explain repeatedly to the public, how this part of the process was done to come up with those numbers. And I think, if nothing else, if there are still people who are surprised or distrustful of what the numbers show, this is yet one more way to say this is just how it's supposed to work. It was done in accordance with best practices or not, but I think it was, and I think having one more way to show that can be beneficial to that. And so I hope, I think if the investigation determines that the comptroller's reports can do that, I would love for that to be part of your beginning of the process to figure out how to move forward.
Yes.
So finance really worked hand in hand with the assessor's office, and throughout this whole process, we've also talked to the state. We went and met with the state as well to understand the process of assessing properties. The state does a rigorous audit and review of everything that the assessor does. And so in my opinion, instead of, I think before we use resources to do that, we ought to at least, as Matthew suggested, review what's out in the public domain already in terms of the audit and information that's there. I think if we wanted to have someone from the state come and explain how they actually review the information that's provided and the assessment, I think that maybe would be a good step for us, just so, but that's my recommendation, is that instead of us, because as Lauren mentioned, there's very few people who have the expertise to understand what the processes are of doing an assessment. And so I think we ought to rely on information that's already publicly available. And I can tell you, Robin and the folks at the state would gladly come and explain that and walk us through what they do in terms of reviewing the assessors and their office's work before we exhaust additional resources. That is just my opinion. So that would be my recommendation.
So you raise your hand first.
Thank you, Chair. So I tend to agree with Finance Director Reed. I appreciate all the kind of context questions and statements, right? Because this is not an investigation, it is a request. I do concur that there is good to sort of with routine audits, it elevates people's confidence in government, and this is something that has been under increased scrutiny or, heightened awareness. But to Director Reed's point, I think it is then likewise incumbent on us and the department from a communication standpoint likewise for context, to say that the state comptroller reviews every local department of assessment on this cadence, and as of the last audit for the comptroller, right? And so, citizens can't know what they don't know. Nor can, council members, right? But if there are government resources that are already being put on a standard cadence to evaluating offices of assessment, I think that's sort of the first line. So kind of both and with what Ms. Reed said. And so to be responsive to the request, I think giving that requestor that context, right, and saying here is the state, here are the state resources and assets that have reviewed this, because perhaps that person didn't know that, and then generally to the general citizen concern, it can be cured potentially by just affirmatively communicating on a standard cadence. Whenever you get assessor something from the state that gives you sort of a clean whatever, push that out to the public, let them know, give them that context, would be my suggestion, Chair.
Yes, ma'am.
I think she actually does a really good job of communicating. I mean, she just said she had 400 and something meetings and yeah, right. So like, personally, I think it's a bad look to have this public meeting where someone is asking for an audit of the assessor's office after such a massive appraised increase, and for us to say no, or it's already on the state's website, or whatever we're gonna say. That, to me, if I'm just a constituent, I'm going, my red lights start to go off. Like, the answer is already out there. I don't, to me, it's a bad look, a really bad look.
I'm not saying that we say no. What I'm saying is we gather additional information, council member, and review the information that's out on the state. And I would recommend even, like I said, having Robin come and explain the review process to us. And then after we gather the information and we know what's out there, then we can actually make a decision on this. So I just wanted to be clear about what my recommendation was. Okay, thanks.
Matthew?
Yeah, I was just gonna, the same thing. It's not that I don't think an audit is appropriate, it's that I think that I don't want to duplicate an audit that's already been completed by the comptroller. So I just want to know what's out there before I say, oh yeah, let's go hire a firm to go do this all over again to investigate the same thing that the comptroller's already investigated. Audit.
Yeah.
I got you.
Review.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Work.
Yeah,
So
so that's what I would say is like, I just need more specificity about like, okay, this is what's been done by the comptroller, go back to the person who's requesting this review and say, what is the thing that you want different from this? And then we can review it all. Like, I mean, I think we hear it and we can review it all here in the committee in a public forum like you suggest.
So then I'd make a motion to defer to the next meeting while we data gather.
I think we've still got some questions and comments. I still do.
Oh, sorry, okay. Sorry, I thought we were done.
If you go and accumulate some of this information that we're talking about, when is our next meeting?
September 23rd.
I mean, that troubles me that we're going to be that far down the road before we really address this issue.
Could we call a special meeting? Let's call a special meeting, Chair.
How much time will you need to get the information pulled together?
I would say a couple of weeks just to make sure that we've got enough time, and then also to organize and public notice everything.
So, a month?
Something like that.
Like end of July.
A general comment. Not having been in that area of government in 8 years, and I think you asked that question, but I'm not sure you specifically addressed, what's the normal rotation for something like that?
So our office doesn't really have a normal rotation for departments. We used to try to get to each department every 5 years, but I will say that there's a lot of the smaller departments fall further down. I'm trying to think if the assessor's office was on the secondary list this year. But what tends to happen is we get lots of requests and it pushes down certain departments. And so it usually tries to be around 5 to 8 years It used to be 5, but as Metro has grown, it's gotten.
So we're on the outside
Yes.
of your
Yes.
normal time frame at this point in time anyway. Okay, that's helpful. So now do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to, oh,
I just want to address something, just to be clear. I was not trying to be defensive. I wanted to state the fact that we are already being audited by the state of Tennessee continuously, and make that clear to all of you here. That's what I was trying to do in reference to it. And I do know, and I love my office and my amazing staff, they work very hard. And so when something that we are whiplashed by, unaware that is going to be occurring, it is surprising. It was not to be defensive. It was to say that we are already being audited. That's where I was going with that, continuously, that's all.
Chair, if I may, just in response to that. So Director Riley, you did convey and acknowledge that you did not
Yes.
let the assessor know.
This one did fall through the
And
cracks.
so I would ask, just from an internal practice standpoint, I would suggest that if a Metro department
Yes.
is on the agenda, then with, set it up 48 hours, Assessor Wilhoit wanted to make you aware that this is an item on our agenda, right? And so I just want to make sure that we formalize that process internally so that no one is caught unawares.
And that is your normal process?
It is for audits, and I think that that's why this one fell through the cracks, is when we put an audit report on the agenda, we naturally email the process owner that was involved in that audit. And this one, since it was a request and was a little bit different, I think that's what happened, is it fell through. But yes.
Here, I would suggest even for a request, if your
Yes.
department is mentioned on the
Exactly.
agenda, I think it's incumbent on us to notify. Okay.
If it makes you feel better, the next discussion item is an audit of the audit.
we're auditing the auditor. All right, so I'll make a motion to defer this for 1 month. We'll have a special meeting called so that we can day together and make a better informed decision on whether or not we move forward with the formal audit.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? So moved.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us
For
today.
being here and providing information.
I want to let you know Friday the 27th at 4 p.m. is the deadline to file your formal appeal. Independent Metro Board of Equalization.
Would you like to discuss the?
Yes. Next is our peer review.
Yes.
As you mentioned, we get audited every 3 years. We go through a peer review because of Yellow Book audit standards. We're required to. We work with the Association of Local Government Auditors, and working with them means that they send 2 auditors from other audit organizations within ALGA, or audit shops within ALGA. This year we had Jenny Scott from Portland, Oregon, and Matthew Cheadle from Dallas, Texas. And they are in audit shops that also utilize Yellow Book, and they go through a training on how to do a peer review. And so what they do is they come to our offices and they data gather. They start by looking at our policies and procedures. We have an extensive administrative guide on just office functioning, and then we have what's called a how to audit guide, which is step-by-step instructions to help us make sure we follow Yellow Book. They take those, and then they also add in a sample of our audit projects. They look at the supporting documentation throughout the entire audit project. And then they do interviews. They interview our staff to gain an understanding of the training and the environment and how much they know about the Yellow Book standards and the work that we do, as well as they spoke to 3 of our audit committee members to gain an understanding of the role you all play. And lastly, they look at our training documentation, especially because Yellow Books requires 40 hours every 2 years, or 80 hours every 2 years, and to make sure that we meet that standard. So they gather all this information and they look at it all and they compare it to the Yellow Book, which is a pretty thick document, and make sure we met those standards. They come out with a report that has 3 options: pass with deficiencies, or fail. We received a pass, which is the highest rating possible. They were complimentary of many things in our office: our staff's competency, the organization of our work papers, the involvement of our audit committee and the understanding of the role of the audit committee, and many other items. We did have 2 management letter comments. These related to audit standards that went into effect in 2018. And we kind of partially implemented them. We didn't fully implement them. So during this peer review, it wasn't caught during the last one, but during this one, they noticed it. And we completely agree with them. The two comments that they had in the management letter, the first one relates to communications with the governing body. We have informally communicated with boards and commissions when we're doing audits of departments, but it's not documented, which means that it didn't happen in audit speak. And so they noted that we didn't formally communicate the roles and responsibilities of our team members. We did communicate some other pieces to them, but it wasn't formally documented about the roles and responsibilities of the team members. So they recommended that we update our policies and procedures to reflect that, our audit template, because each project has its own template that we build off of. And then also, put something in place to make sure that notification happens. We've already done this. We've updated the policies and procedures and the template, and on our latest audit that we just started, we came up with a standard email notification for the chair of the board or commission that informs them of the general audit information, such as planned scope and potential objectives, the roles and responsibilities of the team members, but also allows them an opportunity to respond with any concerns that they may have related to the department or the area. So we've already started doing that. The second piece is how we report on our sampling. So audit samples, when they're used per standard, you're supposed to communicate in the audit report the methodology for that standard, some details around that methodology, and whether or not the results of that sample can be projected onto the population. We were communicating the methodology, which is usually random or judgmental, but we weren't taking it those further steps. So we weren't including the details of if it's a judgmental sample, what criteria are you using for that judgmental sample? And then also the part about projecting it to the population. Oftentimes with controls testing, you can project to a population, but sometimes you can't in other types of sampling. But the great thing about working on a peer review with other audit shops is that we have discussions and they're able to help us and give us recommendations based on what they do in their own audit shops on how we can incorporate that language into our reports better. So we updated the policies and procedures. The draft reports we have right now, we've gone back and made sure that the what's reported in them related to sampling is appropriate and meets that standard. So we've worked through that. So those two are already implemented, and we appreciate the opportunity to us to actually respond to that in that report. The piece of the report that y'all don't see is actually our favorite part of getting a peer review by another organization or other organizations, and that is the verbal comments. So that's where they're just looking at our policies and procedures and what we're doing and telling us, hey, in our audit shop we do this, and it may be better, it may be more efficient, it may be better communication, here's some ideas. And so we did get some of those comments, and we discussed them internally, and we've actually we kind of overhauled our policy and procedures manual after the peer review to modernize it a little bit, to make it more clear for our staff when they're trying to follow it. Because we had a lot of implied language in there, I guess, because every audit's different, so we didn't want to box ourselves in with the language in our how to audit guide, but now we've added some more clarity to it based on their recommendations so that our staff have an easier time of understanding what to do, but still have the flexibility to do the audits the way with every audit being different. So we appreciate that. We appreciate the work they put into this and y'all's time, those that met with them, as well as our staff. I mean, without our staff, we would not have passed this. They put in a lot of work on the projects, because a big piece of this is the work in the projects and the documentation that they put to make sure all of those standards are met. So we really appreciate that.
Congratulations on a job well done.
Yeah.
3 more years.
Yes.
May I ask just a clarifying question? So the associated letter or recommendation relative to communication, was that just specifically to boards and commissions or to departments as well? Basically, is that the suggestion was sort of the initial level setting communication that says, we are going to be auditing, this is what this means, this is what this does not mean, this is what we will, could you just clarify a little bit more with that?
The standard lists a number of parts, I guess it's got like the management, it's got the audit committee and which y'all set the audit plan, so that's how y'all know about the audits that are coming up. Management, we always notify, and that's where we would usually stop as far as the formal notification.
Okay.
And then we would communicate all of the pieces of the scope, the team and everything in our entrance conference with them.
Okay, in person?
In
like
person,
you let them
yes, and we would
know.
document
Yeah.
that, we would document that with agendas and the write-ups of the meetings. It was just the governing body piece that we were missing from
Okay,
that
so
standard.
Governing body meaning like the boards and commissions.
Yes,
And so
the
while you might
direct-
have done that with the department.
Yes.
Depending on the org structure, right, because we've discussed some boards and commissions have hire, fire of that director,
Yes.
and so making sure that that is sort of a, is it effectively the same thing, like what you would send to that department director? You're just sending that to the chair of the associated board and commission, depending on the organizational structure, or how does that?
Yes, so it is a more general, because in the entrance conference, we'll go through with the department head the pieces. For what we're doing for the chair of the board or commission, it still has to include everything that we communicate to the department head.
Okay.
It still has to have the general scope. And we always have preliminary objectives, but they are always subject to change. So we have to communicate that and the team that's on the project. And I'm trying to think, there's one other thing. The big thing is, our estimated time frame of completion. And so we put that in there. We have added a little bit more clarity, because oftentimes when we're in a meeting with a department head, we can walk through our audit process, whereas a board or commission chair is not necessarily going to be involved in each piece, but they're going to wonder, are you going to be reaching out to me? Are you going to be asking questions? And it's more of, we're going to be talking to you, or we may ask the chair or commission some questions related to this audit. But for the most part, we're going to be dealing with the management of the department and giving them a brief overview of how an audit works and what we'll be doing in that process.
And then from a best practice standpoint, is it incumbent on that chair then in the next board and commission meeting to say, they've been notified about this, this is proceeding? Like, I guess, how does then that knowledge get shared with the related board and commission? So I think this is a great recommendation. The chair's getting that letter now, but in that letter, does it say, we suggest at your next, publicly called meeting, you convey this to your
We didn't
commission?
do that. That was part of our discussion with the peer review team, because
Yeah.
we were trying to figure out
Because
what.
it was an investigation versus.
Yeah, well, and we were trying to figure out, because every government is set up different. So for like the two that did our peer review,
Yeah.
they don't really have the boards and commissions that we do. But they're reporting it to the entire council, but their councils are much smaller, and because their councils are the committees that are overseeing these departments. So it's slightly different. But their recommendation to us was to just start with the chair and put in there, if the chair would like to share this, they're welcome to. However, we can't, like from our perspective, draft audits, we can't speak about them in public meetings, so we wouldn't be able to be there to answer questions if there were any, if they decided to do it at a meeting. But then that's up to them, it is up to them, but we could put that in there as far as distributing it to the rest of the commission, or notifying the rest of the commission if they believe so.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? Okay, next action is the Metro Auditor's Annual Performance Review. The process this year was a little bit different than what it's been historically. Correct me if I'm wrong, but historically it's been a 5-point evaluation system that's now a 3-point.
For the staff, it was 5 points. Y'all's was always been 3.
Okay.
That was what we tried to make more consistent this year.
So Lauren did a self-evaluation, her staff did an evaluation of her, and then the audit committee did independent evaluations. I would say that Lauren was harder on herself than anybody else was. Her staff was very positive on Lauren, and the audit commission fell in between. So that's without belaboring all the numbers and so forth, that's kind of where that stands. So our responsibility now is to do we set your salary or recommend a salary?
You would recommend the salary increase, or, well, y'all would set the salary increase.
Okay. So at this point, the salary for 2026, based on the automatic adjustments,
Which I'll explain, I can explain what those are. So there was a pay plan change that everybody at Metro was affected by, including myself. They divided up my director level into 5 instead of 2. And where I fell within that automatically increased my salary by 3.3%. And then there was the across-the-board adjustment that per my employment letter I'm eligible for, and that's an additional 2%. So that was 5.3% was the automatic increase.
so what we are really deciding is the merit increase in our compensation. Am I the only one that has the numbers, or does everybody have the numbers?
I only gave them to you.
So the 2026 salary, as it stands right now, with no merit increase, is $221,000. A 1% merit increase, we put it to $223,000. A 1.5% merit increase to $224,400. Or a 2% merit increase to $225,500. So do I hear a motion?
I move for the 2%, for the full 2% merit increase.
Second.
I think, right.
All in favor?
Aye.
So moved.
Sorry.
Let the minutes reflect that. Yeah.
Chair, just as a point of clarification, and I apologize if I missed it, but you shared in a general sense the results of the performance review. Did we receive that?
You did not, because at the last meeting, the decision was made to send the results to the chair
Okay.
to discuss at this meeting. So staff sent them to Mr. Bates.
I think what I would suggest, maybe Chair, before, like next year, kind of a look ahead, is maybe just a little bit more detail in that Chair's report, just to understand that just a little bit more before.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Internal audit report, project status.
Okay, first we have recommendation implementation. We reached out to a lot of departments a little bit early this time to try to get before the 6:30 deadline that most of them had set. Most all of them responded before this was printed. Some of them just missed the deadline. But we had 24 recommendations that were due, or 25 recommendations that were due before 6:30. 24 of them were reported as being implemented. One needed a revised date. It was the public property audit that we did. When public property moved from finance to general services, they're trying to implement a process to make sure that they maintain documentation around, like, looking at different processes or properties and what they do around that. They've decided to go the route of actually implementing a system for document retention and following the process that they have, so that's going to take a little bit longer. So they requested about a year in order to get that all set up. So that's the only one with revised date. The other piece of this is last week we did reissue the Metro Arts Commission audit. That audit report, the only thing that changed about it was the responses from management. We worked closely with the interim director, Ashley Bachelder, to make sure that the responses appropriately addressed the recommendations, which we had a little bit of trouble with the former interim director. So we worked with her to make sure those actions would address the recommendations, as well as put in feasible timelines for them to implement. They are still going through some turnover, and they are still hiring people, and they still have an interim director. So we recognize that it may take a little bit longer than most departments, but we also still wanted to make sure that the urgency of getting some of these processes were in place. And so she's working to make her way through some of the recommendations. They've already implemented quite a few of them, especially some of the more pressing ones. It's just really getting those processes set up. And as an interim director, it's taken a little bit longer. But that is out there. Yeah. And next, we have our ongoing projects, which...
I apologize.
Yep.
Can we ask questions
Sure,
about the
absolutely.
arts update? Okay. So I understand that kind of from a general perspective and stuff is in process, but I think I was trying to kind of look back and find the one from June of last year to kind of see what my notes were on that, to see if this response was kind of addressing all those things that were sort of like kind of pending out there, hey, we'll look at that. And I guess the only thing that I recalled, I mean, is there, as far as like internal controls, I think I alluded to it earlier, but there was basically like how people were kind of booking their time or like their vacation time, which was like through some kind of random platform. And I think the question at the time, again, is like, well, why is one department of Metro internally tracking that in a way? And so I couldn't really ascertain if with the reissue, anything that was not addressed. So I sense in a general sense, I appreciate Interim Director Batchelder being highly responsive, but is there any more kind of specificity as to what was changed or done or
What's been implemented related to recommendations?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's a number in there, and I don't have it in front of me, but the ones that are completed, or some of the, I think that they have migrated more towards putting controls around that leave time. The contract employees, that contract was, or at least those employees were moved around to make sure that that wasn't being utilized. The creation of a time, like executive director time, that was removed. And those were some of the more pressing things that we had. It's the stuff around, the processes around grants that is gonna take longer because they're still going through a lot of that. What we had when we had discussions around a lot of this was there were needed to be general processes and policies and procedures for people to follow, and that's where we had more of the discussion of we need a timeline around this, because
Okay.
originally it was, when we received them, it was this is ongoing.
Right.
And we pushed to make sure we had a solid time frame around it, because financial policies need to be in place, as do grant policies and the other pieces that need to follow. And that was where we were trying to get to prioritize which ones are first. And so that's where we were working with her to figure out which ones to address first.
Okay, so just hypothetically, again, the observation L, leave time, recording, and
Yes, that was-
utilization, and the recommendations kind of 1 through 5. So reissued such that now new leadership has the opportunity to work through these recommendations, and so there will be a subsequent reporting to say, we've cured 1, 2,
Yes.
3, 4, 5, ABC. Okay, all right.
The big
so-
piece of it was that when we issued this report initially, there were absolutely no responses. It just said accept.
Right.
And that was, so we've been working, and we had something in place almost, and then the old interim director left. And so then we
Right.
had to wait
Okay.
for the new one in order to get her footing a little bit to actually put it in there. Because we can't check to make sure until we know their action plan, because we can't tell them what to do. And so they had to establish some sort of action plan or some sort of recommendation implementation. And so that was what we sent. So we went on and reissued it. We haven't had a chance to verify the ones that say they are implemented. We haven't had a chance to actually verify them. But we are starting on that because of the magnitude and the breadth of that report.
Okay, so basically this just sort of presses the reset button now, and then we'll follow a usual process of following up, and we've responded. Okay, thank you.
If I may just add really quickly, finance is still overseeing all the finances of the Arts Commission.
Okay.
So I just, like, we're reviewing everything that goes out, making sure all the journal entries are correct. There is still full financial review in place.
Okay.
So I just
Great.
wanted
I
to make
appreciate
sure
that, yeah.
that folks were aware that that is still ongoing.
That's helpful, thank you.
Thank you. Under administrative matters,
Our budget update. So you'll see we're pretty far under budget. We're like 73% as we come into the end of the fiscal year. The biggest part of that is salaries, and that's because we had open positions for much of the year. But now we're fully staffed, so hopefully that's not the same going into next year. The next piece that made us so far under budget was because of consulting fees. We had a project that we thought we may be able to do with consultants that had to be pushed, but when we noticed that we had freed up some of our consulting budget, what we've actually done is, it's not reflected because we haven't had the invoices yet. We've engaged one of our consultants to do an IT audit risk assessment for Metro for us. Every year, we struggle to come up with IT audits to put on the plan because that's not our expertise. We always outsource them. That works really well for us, but somebody has to come up with the audits for the audit plan. And often we are looking at other jurisdictions or we're asking individuals within Metro, but we just don't have a good grasp on it. So what we've done is we've engaged Fraser and Dieter to do an IT audit risk assessment for us and learn the IT environment of Metro and find those higher risks. As well as what is Metro already doing. We don't want to duplicate efforts. Sometimes when we pull things from other audit shops because it looks like a good audit, we find out that it's not really a great audit for Metro. And that's what Fraser and Dieter is hopefully looking for, is where we don't duplicate efforts. As well as to kind of give us a timeline, because IT audits are one area where some timeline of routine audits is actually pretty good. And so they're hopefully going to put together a timeline and give us audit plan ideas for the future. To make sure that we're addressing the biggest risks at Metro and not just ones that we're kind of guessing at. So that's FY '26, or '25. '26, we were lucky. We got all of our budget requests. That includes an additional investigator position to work with Paul. So hopefully soon after the new fiscal year, we'll get that posted and get that hired. And we also got training, which we're very excited about because training is so important to our office. And then some other small budget requests. Yeah. And then staffing, we're fully staffed.
Fabulous. Congratulations.
Any considerations for future meetings? All right, then the public meeting is now adjourned, and we'll move into executive session.